was supposed to be the lesson part 4, which covers chapter 11 through chapter 14. The problem is Mental Ray is no longer in 3ds Max. So a quick rundown of basically what they wanted to teach was the introduction to Mental Ray, and since it's no longer part of the program, it has some good points on pixelation and how to make things have less edgy appearance or whatnot, or pixelated appearance, depending on what you want to call it. It gives some good background on color schemes and such. But the problem is, like I said, it's not in the program, so you can't follow along with this at all. Chapter 12 dealt with global illumination, photon mapping, and final gather. Photon mapping is both, well, it's an indirect illumination method. It was something I used to use when I did special effects in the previous versions of 3ds Max. They removed that in 2017, I believe, and in 2018. So it's no longer in there for either of those. Photon mapping is automatically done by the Arnold renderer now. So a lot of the things that they covered in here, where you're changing the average global illumination photons per light, that's no longer relevant. You can't use that. They had covered the well, I think this is further on. In the lighting strategies, it went into high dynamic resolution images, or HDRIs, which basically it used to render like this, now it renders like this, and you have to set the different settings to get it to do that. When you activate an Arnold renderer, it automatically does this. You don't have to mess with these other two steps. It went through the HDRI's load settings, in which you had to set the black pixel and the white pixel to the two ranges so that it would give you the appropriate thing for your high dynamic resolution image. And it went through the shadows of how to set up all the shadows for that, and Arnold does all of that. Also, there's no longer Mr. Sky, Mr. Sun, and Mr. Physical, Mr. Sky, Mr. Photographic, excuse me, exposure control settings anymore. It's all kind of condensed into one thing with Arnold. And as for using photons and final gathering together, you can't set your photons anymore. So you can't really set up the atmospheric lighting with the way that they want you to do it. You can still use atmospheric lighting, but you can't quite set everything up the way it used to be set up. Also, since Mental Ray no longer exists, the Mental Ray materials no longer exist. There's a different type of version for them in Arnold, and I'm going to be going through that later today. So for this book, it would have covered chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14, which was part 4, which has the Mental Ray on there, and then part 5 covers the advanced visualization techniques. And when they're talking about doing their compositing and creating their renderings, they continue to try to use they continue to try to use the Mental Ray. And unfortunately, like I said, Mental Ray is not in 3ds Max anymore. So a lot of these techniques that they offered in this book are no longer relevant. Some of them are still very useful to look at. You can grab some pointers here and there from reading through it. But most of it is just streamlined at this point, which I think is much better. It makes creation of 3D visualization and artwork so much easier, incredibly easier. So the Photoshop techniques, they were talking about you have to like paste the image into there, into Photoshop, and adjust it in Photoshop, bring it back in, and you can put it into either your lighting system or into system. You can still do some of that in Arnold, but the majority of these things that it covers from reading through doesn't really apply to this program. Well, it doesn't really apply to 3ds Max anymore. There's two different ways to do the efficient 3D workflow. You could either do it on your computer, which uses basically your own RAM, your CPU speed, or computer processing unit speed, and it can be extremely long rendering times depending on what you're using and how complicated your designs are. Or you can use a external 3D rendering site in which they'll do all the processing and you pay them a fee, and that's how most movie production studios do it. They'll send it off to a site that does specifically rendering, and they have all their processing power and their computing power, and they'll pay them a hefty fee, and they'll render their scenes to the spectacular special effects that we get to see today in the movies and video game trailers and such like that. So with this one, it has basically it would be covering how to market the services, requesting the drawings, making sure that the designs and drawings are what you need and up to spec, and then addressing the poor design qualities or poor designs and asking for better ones. You'd be writing proposals, creating project folders. Then you break up the project. You have to create your line work. In AutoCAD is recommended. Clean up your line work, which basically means whenever there's a curve or a break in your line that won't translate into 3ds Max, you have to manually correct that, which can take hours on end. And then you have to build the modeling or build the building elements, which you basically transfer the line work over into 3ds Max, and then you can use each individual line work as long as you transfer it with the layer settings available, and then you can pick which layers you want after you've made your own line work and set up your own line work. Creating the site models, site elements is when we would use the topographical data that they would provide, whether it be the numbering system or the actual line system, which looks like a series of wavy splines. And then at that point, we could create a background rig, which is what was covered in Chapter 9, which has the spherical and the cylindrical backgrounds in which you're able to see visually whatever background you wanted to set up. The use of material libraries, the libraries have changed. It's now Arnold instead of Mental Ray. And then the lighting presets are different because it's a different thing. It's now Arnold instead of Mental Ray. And then they have creating the animation paths, making your maps project folder, and then creating test renders, basically fixing and changing animations, and then doing the production renders. So that's all the animation process, and this is all actually provided in the other book I'm going to be using. Managing System Resources. You basically have to know what you're going to be doing. What they're using in this book is a Core 2 Duo with 2 to 4 gigs of RAM. The current program, 3ds Max 2018, uses more RAM than what they currently have in this book. Currently I have 8 gigs of RAM, and I have a Radeon X7. Don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It should have displayed when I first started this stream what exactly I have. Come Tuesday, I will have 64 gigs of RAM. I'm upgrading it 4 times what I currently have, 16 times what they're recommending, so I can process my renderings a little bit faster. And I also am running an RX 580 graphics card on mine, which has 8 gigs of dedicated video RAM. And unfortunately, 2018 uses DirectX 11. I'm hoping that 3ds Max 2019 will use managing your file sizes, basically if you use parametric objects, which can be created in BIM programs like Revit and things like that, you'll have a smaller file size typically than you would if you make your editable mesh and your editable polys. And you always want to keep your poly counts down and your face counts down while trying to still display your model in an efficient manner, because otherwise your computer resources may not be able to handle the rendering time or the amount of pixels that you put on your screen. So this book, it's been an interesting learning curve, I should say, but it has good pointers, but this other book I'm going to be using covers it more in detail for the current program, which is going to be Kelly Murdock's Autodesk 3ds Max 2018, and the complete reference guide. And that's what I'm going to be teaching or learning myself, the Arnold renderer and the animation techniques that go along with that. So this pretty much summarizes this book, and it goes into the appendixes at this point. So that covers the 3ds Max 2012 design, architectural and visualization for intermediate users. And after this, I'm going to be going into the Kelly Murdock's Autodesk 2018 complete reference guide to explore the Arnold rendering side of it and the animation side of it. And before I go into the Arnold rendering side of it and the visualization side of it, I'm going to start the creation of I'm going to continue the creation that I'd already started of the character modeling side of it, which is CAD 220. Both CAD 220 and CAD 221 are offered at the Front Range Community College in Denver, Colorado. And you just have to talk to their 3D program development advisors is the word I'm trying to find, and ask them when those courses are available and what degrees those apply to. And I believe that's it for this introduction. As for this one, I'm going to design a 3D building that I'm going to be putting into the background of my project, which is going to consist of having a character animation in front of it with daylight system and some background images. Anyway, I'm going to close this video and have this be just kind of a reiteration of my final project. Thank you.